Hi and welcome. I'm Andy Miochin. You are watching A News. Here are the headlines. Donald Trump is in the United Arab Emirates for the final stop of his Gulf tour. Vladimir Putin currently has no plans to travel to Istanbul for peace talks with Ukraine, the Kremlin says. France announces the expulsion of several Algerian diplomats in retaliation for Algiers' decision to send back 15 French officials earlier this week. Thank you for tuning in. U.S. President Donald Trump is in the United Arab Emirates for the third and final stop of his Middle East tour. Before the final leg of his tour, Trump attended an event with business leaders in Doha and visited Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the largest American military facility in the region, where he addressed American troops. While en route to Abu Dhabi, Trump spoke to reporters aboard the Air Force One on securing a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. He said that nothing is going to happen until he and Russian President Vladimir Putin get together. Donald Trump's previous stop in Qatar resulted in deals that the White House says will generate an exchange worth $1.2 trillion. Trump also said that a deal was close on Iran's nuclear program and suggested a military strike on Tehran's nuclear sites could be avoided. Our Ubay Shabander has more on the Qatar visit.
It is a presidential visit that is leaving a lasting mark. President Trump's Middle East tour continued on Wednesday, where after a meeting with the leaders of the Gulf Cooperation Council and a widely applauded joint meeting with Syria's new leader, President Trump traveled to Qatar. Qatari Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani hailed American President Trump's visit to Doha on Wednesday as, quote, historic, affirming that it marks a turning point in the strategic relationship between the two countries. Both the U.S. and Qatar signed a number of key agreements in various fields, including defense and aviation. In the aviation field, Qatar finalized a major agreement of over $200 billion to purchase jets from U.S. manufacturer Boeing. In the defense sector, the two sides signed a statement of intent on enhanced defense cooperation, as well as letters of offers and acceptance for the acquisition of the American MQ-9B drone. A joint declaration of strategic cooperation was also signed between the two countries. Earlier, the Qatari Emir said that his country is working with U.S. President Trump to promote peace. The Qatari Emir said that he is working with the U.S. to promote peace in the region as well as in other regions, such as Russia and Ukraine. President Trump's visit to Qatar is the first by an American president to the Arabian Gulf country since George W. Bush's trip to Doha in 2003. Qatar hosts the American Al Udeid base, one of America's largest military bases in the Middle East. And the White House on Wednesday announced that it had secured economic commitments worth at least $1.2 trillion from Qatar. Combined with the hundreds of billions of dollars in economic and defense deals that President Trump signed in Riyadh earlier in the week, and the announcement of the lifting of all sanctions on Syria, President Trump's Middle East trip is, without a doubt, having a significant impact on the region, while securing massive deals intended to boost the American economy. Ubay Shabander, Washington, D.C., A News.
On Donald Trump's Middle East trip that notably does not include Israel, we earlier spoke to Maurice Hirsch of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Here's what he has to say.
I think it's been always very clear that President Trump's major goal for his visit to the Gulf, to the Middle East, was to really improve the American economy. That's one of the subjects which was really a leader in the run-up to the elections, and President Trump has put that first and foremost on his agenda moving forward. And I think more than a political diplomatic trip, this has been really an economic financial trip, securing massive purchases by the Middle East countries of US products and strengthening the US economy and companies. So I think that President Trump's really dedication to the idea of Middle East peace hasn't changed from his last term. I think that it's important to him now to ensure that the peace of the Abraham Accords is extended throughout the region. It isn't a question of Israeli leverage over Washington, but rather an understanding of common interests. It is a common interest for Israel and for the United States to expand the peace in the Middle East, rather than continuing this cycle of violence driven by the Ayatollahs in Iran and its axis of evil. That is something which has to be disbanded, dismantled, for the benefit of all of the residents of the region. And I think that now Israel is seeing that this process of maximum pressure on Hamas is actually bearing fruit. Hamas is showing more flexibility than ever before to come to an agreement to release the terrorists, to release the Israeli hostages, and whether it be as a result of the military pressure being put on Hamas, whether it's being a result of the embargo and the siege on Hamas and its lines of support, and whether it be from really the political ramifications of Trump and the discussions in the Middle East.
The U.S. imposed fresh sanctions targeting 6 individuals and 12 entities they say are helping Iran manufacture components for its missile program. The U.S. Treasury Department alleges that those sanctions, based in Iran and China, are helping various sub-organizations of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in efforts to develop carbon fiber materials needed for manufacturing of ballistic missiles. These measures are part of Donald Trump's maximum pressure campaign, which continues despite ongoing U.S.-Iran nuclear talks. Tehran described recent round of negotiations as positive, but said new U.S. sanctions undermine the process. Some of Donald Trump's comments on Iran during his Gulf tour didn't sit well with Tehran. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian condemned the U.S. president's accusations that Iran is carrying out proxy wars and said Iran would not bow to any bully. Our Turaj Shiralilu has the details in Tehran.
Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has strongly condemned remarks by U.S. President Donald Trump against Tehran's policies during his tour of the Persian Gulf Arab countries, and said Iran will not bow to any bullying. According to the official website of the President of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian told a provincial meeting of government officials that the U.S. President is not knowledgeable about Iranians who are peace-loving but do not bow down to pressures. He was referring to Trump's comments on Tuesday in Saudi Arabia, in which the U.S. President said he favors a nuclear deal with Tehran, but was quick to shift his rhetoric and leveled accusations about Iran's nuclear weapons admissions and regional policies. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi joined President Pezeshkian in sharply criticizing the U.S. President's latest anti-Iran statements as deceptive, saying Trump has falsely accused Iran of supporting insecurity in the region. Speaking to reporters after the cabinet meeting on Wednesday, Araghchi blasted Trump's unilateral maximum pressure policy on Tehran's nuclear program after he withdrew from the nuclear deal reached with Iran during former President Barack Obama's administration. Trump, who visited Doha after Saudi Arabia on Wednesday, adopted a rather soft rhetoric on Iran at a formal dinner and appealed to Qatar to contribute to the ongoing indirect talks on Tehran's nuclear program held between Iranian and U.S. officials. Since 12th of April, Iran and the U.S. have held 4 rounds of talks in Muscat and Rome, mediated by the Omani Foreign Ministry, which both sides have so far termed as positive and constructive. On Friday, senior diplomats from Iran and the European Troika of Britain, France, and Germany are to meet in Istanbul to discuss the 2015 nuclear agreement between Iran and world powers, also known as JCPOA, as well as the ongoing talks between Iran and the United States. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting for A News TV, Tehran.
All eyes are on Istanbul as the first direct talks between Ukraine and Russia since March 2022 are expected to begin. However, the details, such as the time and the exact composition of the Ukrainian delegation, are not yet known. Moscow has announced their delegation, confirming that Russian President Vladimir Putin will not be attending the talks. The head of the Russian delegation, Putin's aide, Vladimir Medinsky, has reportedly said on his Telegram channel that he has arrived in Istanbul and is ready for serious and professional work. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Ankara, where he met Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. At the tarmac of Ankara's airport, Zelensky told reporters that the Russian delegation dispatched to Turkey for talks was of a low rank and had an unclear mandate. His office previously said that Zelensky's meeting with Erdogan will define Ukraine's next diplomatic steps to bring a full and unconditional ceasefire, achieve a durable peace, and ensure security. As Ukraine and Russia are expected to start direct negotiations, people on both sides are reacting with a mix of hope, frustration, and doubt. While some welcome the prospect of dialogue, others fear it will change little.
While Ukraine and Russia are set to begin direct talks to negotiate a ceasefire, reactions on the streets of both countries reveal a shared mood: skepticism, cautious hope, and fatigue. In Ukraine, where the full-scale war has entered its fourth year, many doubt that any negotiation with Moscow will bring real change.
It seems to me Zelensky is doing what most Ukrainians would like him to do, but whether it will work, I think not. The only thing Putin understands is force. He doesn't understand talks. It will be yet another meeting, and then things will go on as they are now.
Unfortunately, Ukrainians have been in this war for a very long time. The full-scale war has gone on longer than anyone expected. That's why, sadly, Ukrainians are already ready to make concessions, even territorial ones, just to stop further land grabs and killings, to bring this war to an end so things don't get even worse.
In Moscow, some still cling to hope, but few expect a breakthrough.
The hope is slender, but there is still hope. I fear that once again the dialogue with Ukraine will fail. Unless there is some help from other countries, I mean US and Europe, maybe something works this way.
They're trying to push for this 30-day ceasefire. Putin will not cooperate. We need a long perspective peace, that's all.
Many remain skeptical, as Russia's President Vladimir Putin is not participating at the talks in Istanbul. However, a delegation will be there, led by Russian presidential aide Vladimir Medinsky, together with 3 other high-level delegates and 4 experts.
NATO foreign ministers gathered for an informal meeting in Antalya as the direct Kiev-Moscow talks on ending the war were expected to begin. Diplomats say they hope the talks could be a turning point in the prolonged and devastating conflict. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said the Istanbul talks might signal the start of a new chapter, while U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stressed that there is no military solution to the conflict.
Our efforts to bring the war in Ukraine to a just and durable end will be an important part of our discussions. You all know that Turkey has always stressed the need for a diplomatic track to this end. Now, after 3 years of immense suffering, there is finally a window of opportunity. The talks in Istanbul hopefully may open a new chapter. Our meeting today will be an important occasion to discuss how we can individually and collectively support this process.
And Marco, thank you so much for having this opportunity. I really want to say we all admire what you and the President are doing and the whole team are doing. You have been working so hard over the last couple of days in the Middle East. You are really making progress. I think this is important. This shows American leadership not only on Ukraine, where it was the new American administration breaking the deadlock under the leadership of President Trump, but also now when it comes to the Middle East and of course all the other issues in the world, we collectively have to make sure stay stable, and we need American leadership, and you're providing that.
Whatever mechanism is outlined, whatever the process is that needs to happen, I mean, we are open to being constructive and helpful in any way we can to end the conflict. I will say this, and I'll repeat it, that there is no military solution to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. This war is going to end not through a military solution, but through a diplomatic one.
Thank you. Thank you.
On the expected Istanbul negotiations, we're talking with political analyst Enrique Cosero, coming to us from Madrid. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, the Ukrainians are saying that the Russian delegation is of a rather low rank. There are a few deputy ministers, the military intelligence chief, and Putin's aide that headed the delegation in the only previous round of direct talks just weeks into the full-scale invasion. Zelensky dismissed Moscow's team as a theater prop. Would you say he's right?
Yes, sort of stage performance, as you want to call it, that Russia is not going to give any kind of impression of they're so in the way of reaching an agreement, and that's part. As I said, this is part of the performance in order to say I got already. I'm most important, and probably the talks are going to go in the way I want them, go in the way that you want it, or everybody can want. So for me right now, it's Russia. Russia is Russia. I know this is redundant, but that Vladimir Putin shows his style and his order to do the things. I think this is pretty accurate. Everybody could see this coming from the very first beginning.
Well, Enrique, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights. In other news, London has welcomed the International Civil Aviation Organization's ruling that Russia is responsible for the 2014 downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 over eastern Ukraine, which killed all 298 people on board, including 10 British nationals. This is the first time the UN body ruled in a dispute between member states, concluding that Russia violated international aviation law by using weapons against a civilian aircraft. The UK government hailed the ruling as a significant step towards securing justice for the victims' families and upholding international law. Russia has denied involvement and dismissed the ruling, labeling the proceedings as politically motivated. France and Algeria are locked in another round of diplomatic tensions as both sides expel officials in a rapid back and forth. The row comes just weeks after a short-lived effort to ease tensions.
Tensions between France and Algeria have flared again as Paris announces the expulsion of several Algerian diplomats in retaliation for Algiers' decision to send back 15 French officials earlier this week. France's foreign ministry summoned Algeria's chargé d'affaires on Wednesday to deliver the message, stating that officials holding diplomatic passports without valid visas would be forced to leave French territory. The ministry did not specify how many individuals would be expelled. The move follows a series of tit-for-tat expulsions between the two countries, which began in mid-April when Algeria expelled 12 French officials. France responded by sending home 12 Algerian diplomats and consular staff and recalled its ambassador. Just last month, there had been signs of reconciliation after France's Foreign Affairs Minister Jean-Noël Barrot visited Algiers, but relations have quickly deteriorated again. Speaking to French media, Barrot called Algeria's actions incomprehensible and brutal. He added that the dispute is less about numbers and more about principles, saying, Algeria wanted to send back our agents. We're sending back theirs. The Algerian Foreign Ministry has yet to release an official statement. However, Algeria's state-run press agency claims the recent French officials being expelled had been appointed under irregular conditions. France, in turn, accuses Algeria of breaching a 2013 bilateral agreement by imposing new entry conditions for French public officials. The diplomatic rift also comes against a broader backdrop of strained ties, notably after President Emmanuel Macron's support for Morocco in the Western Sahara dispute angered Algiers last year.
China has said it will pause export controls on 28 U.S. companies for 90 days. The Chinese Ministry of Commerce announced it had stopped these companies from exporting certain products in April. But after recent talks with the U.S. and Switzerland, both countries agreed to suspend these restrictions from the 14th of May for 3 months. The talks also led to a reduction in extra tariffs, lowering them to 10%. Earlier this year, the U.S. raised tax hikes on Chinese goods several times, reaching as high as 145%. Beijing responded by increasing levies on American products up to 125%. The so far temporary tariff truce between U.S. and China brought not only relief in the two largest economies of the world, but also a window of opportunity for other players. Central Asian countries linking China to the West might seize this opportunity. Joining us from Almaty to briefly talk on this is international relations expert Nurbolat Nishimbayev. Welcome, thank you so much for joining us. How much would you say that Central Asia's role in world trade has evolved from the beginning of the Washington-Beijing trade war that has now been paused for 3 months? Did each of these stages bring about new options for the region?
Definitely, in the last 3 months, we have seen kind of rising interest to the Central Asia from the global powers. But this is the moment for Central Asian countries to take it as an opportunity or as a threat, as a danger for the whole region. It's totally up to the regional countries and the leaders, I think. But from my point of view, Central Asia, in particular Kazakhstan, they are taking great opportunity to make this region as a bridge between the China on the other side, Europe. So connecting between the two continents by the trans corridors and the many other trade routes. So for the long term, the Chinese and the United States trade war, so-called, definitely will change the status quo in Central Asia and will set up new rules. I think in the upcoming decades, probably Central Asia will be kind of a modernized new form of Silk Road, will be kind of the central route, moving goods from China to the Europe. Because in the last week we have seen the backlash between Pakistan and India. It was also destabilized the South Asia part. So therefore I think Central Asia now is one of the best alternative trade routes, sending goods from China to the Europe. So if we look at from the wider sense, definitely Central Asia will play a key role between the China and the USA trade relations for the long term. So in June in Astana, we are waiting for the Central Asia and the China Forum, which will make a declaration for the strategic partnership between the Central Asian countries and the China. We will see it.
Yes, indeed, we will see in June. Thank you, Nurbolat, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Over in South Korea, trade representatives of 21 Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation member economies gathered on the resort island of Jeju to discuss multilateral trade and other cooperation agendas, including reform of the World Trade Organization amid current challenges. At their meeting, APEC says exports have almost stalled and uncertainty is rattling global markets.
The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Grouping warned that exports in the region will barely grow this year amid US tariffs, as the 21-member bloc kicked off an annual gathering of its trade ministers.
We have heard announcements of higher tariffs, retaliatory measures, suspension or elimination of benefits or procedures facilitating trade. We have heard about an increase of non-tariff measures affecting trade. And all of this, unfortunately, is not helping business, because what they are doing is to add unprecedented levels of policy uncertainty. This is also eroding investors' confidence, weakening demand, and they could eventually affect jobs. And we are worried about that.
And the impact is already showing. APEC says export growth in the region has nearly flatlined. That slowdown is also pulling down overall growth. The outlook now is weaker than expected.
The exports of goods by the APEC region will grow by just 0.4%, and this is far from the 5.7% growth rate last year. We think that this year the GDP growth for APEC is going to be around 2.6%, and this is 0.7 percentage point reduction from our 3.3 forecast that we had in March 2025. And this downgrade is coming mostly because of the uncertainty that I mentioned earlier, that it's basically generated by measures that are affecting trade and investment prospects negatively.
That growing uncertainty is making companies freeze plans and delay investments. APEC is tracking just how unstable things have become, and the numbers are striking.
We have some indices that are measuring trade policy uncertainty, and they have reached unprecedented levels. So the levels in April were 10 times larger than the average value that we had between 2015 and 2024. And this surge is precisely reflecting these escalating tariffs, the retaliatory measures, and other trade measures restricting trade.
There's been one positive step. The US and China have agreed to pause some measures, but APEC says that's just a start.
Governments is having some talks, and there have been some recent announcements de-escalating some of these issues. There have been a pause for 90 days on certain measures between the US and China, and I think this is positive. But this is not taking us to the situation before April.
The message from APEC is the global economy needs fewer trade fights and more cooperation, or risk deeper trouble ahead.
Uzbekistan is preparing to bring its companies to global markets. The country is one step away from joining the World Trade Organization. Our Fariza Kalimurzina has the latest.
President Shavkat Mirziyoyev has instructed the government to accelerate Uzbekistan's accession to the World Trade Organization. He has called for the adoption of about 15 legal acts and updates to several key laws. Officials have also been told to finish talks with 9 WTO member countries that Uzbekistan has not negotiated with before by the end of this year. Uzbekistan entered the active phase of WTO accession in 2023. Since then, there have been 4 working group meetings where experts addressed over 500 issues. Bilateral negotiations were held with 33 countries, and 24 of those have already been successfully concluded. As part of the preparation, significant work has been done to align national legislation with WTO standards. This includes the adoption of certain new laws, 10 presidential decrees and resolutions, 19 cabinet resolutions, and 10 interdepartmental regulations. In a major shift, the exclusive rights of 6 state-owned enterprises have also been eliminated. The WTO currently includes 166 member countries and regulates about 98% of global trade. Uzbekistan's membership application is still under review, and accession talks actually began in 1994 but were put on hold and only resumed in 2020. Experts say that WTO membership could significantly boost the country's exports, unlocking nearly $6 billion in untapped potential. That includes $600 million each in clothing and fruit exports and $400 million in cars and auto parts. The World Bank estimates that joining the WTO could raise Uzbekistan's GDP by 17% within 5 to 7 years, largely thanks to growth in the service sector. That's especially important for a landlocked country like Uzbekistan, where service exports can make a big difference. Historically, accession to the WTO is a time-consuming process. For example, China took 15 years, while Russia needed 18. The more complex country's legal and policy framework, the longer it tends to take. But Uzbekistan is aiming to finish the process by the 14th WTO Ministerial Conference, which is scheduled for 2026 in Cameroon. Fariza Kalimurzina, A News, in Almaty, Kazakhstan.
U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff said that countries like Lebanon, Syria, Libya, Azerbaijan and Armenia could soon join the Abraham Accords. He cited positive reactions and progress towards resolving conflicts in these nations. Witkoff expressed confidence that more countries could join the Abraham Accords in the coming months. He said this would reflect the Trump administration's commitment to advancing peace and stability in the region. Turkish finance minister addressed investors at the EBRD annual meeting in London, saying that Ankara's economic program is on track despite recent global turbulence.
Turkey's economic program is continuing with determination and delivering results. That's according to the Treasury and Finance Minister Mehmet Şimşek. Speaking at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development's annual meeting in London, Şimşek gave a detailed presentation titled Turkey's Economic Transformation and Growing Investment Potential.
It is on track, it is working, it is delivering. Look, the essence of our medium-term program, or we call it sometimes macroeconomic stabilization and reform program, the essence of it is attaining price stability. We're making good progress. Inflation is down from peak of 75% recently to about 38%. We see inflation trending down. Now, recent turbulence has raised some question marks about expectations, but financial conditions are tighter, highly likely disinflationary. Oil prices have fallen significantly. That's also significantly disinflationary, let's put it this way. So we see inflation staying on track. Growth could turn out to be slower, but we can live with that. Labor market is pretty tight. Unemployment rate is at 20-year low.
Turkey has a population of 86 million and a GDP exceeding $1.3 trillion and remains an attractive market for global investors. According to Şimşek, the national income per capita surpassed $15,000 last year. Between 2003 and 2024, the Turkish economy grew by more than 5% on average annually. In a significant development, Şimşek also commented on the recent dissolution announcement by the PKK terrorist group, a conflict that has cost Turkey an estimated $1.8 trillion over the 5 decades.
This is huge credit positive. We will no longer be wasting our energy and resources on combating terror. We will spend our energy and money on rebuilding. Southeast part of Turkey, Eastern Turkey, where demographics is extremely favorable. It will become the new engine of Turkey's growth. But also, it will help stabilize the region. It will help us to lift the entire region, including Syria, Iraq, etc. Everybody will benefit from peace, stability, because that's the only path to prosperity.
Addressing a question on protectionist trade policies, Şimşek criticized the growing fragmentation of global trade, calling it a lose-to-lose situation. He underlined that while global trade is a key driver of economic growth, Turkey's economic momentum also relies on strong domestic demand and investment. Exports of goods account for around 20% of Turkey's GDP, while the services sector makes up another 10%.
Well, that's all we have for you for now. Thank you for watching, and do stay tuned to A News.